So let me get this straight, Dr. Mira Blackwood said, staring at the holographic briefing display that showed what appeared to be claw marks gouged 3 inches deep into solid titanium. You want me to relocate a family of aggressive fauna that can apparently shred military-grade armor like tissue paper. The Zephyrian mining supervisor, Commander Vexcol, nodded his crystalline head with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for scheduling root canals. The creatures have established a den in Mining Sector 12. Production has ceased completely. The workers refuse to enter the area. Can't imagine why, Mira muttered, zooming in on what looked suspiciously like bite marks in a support beam. And you called me instead of, say, a military extermination team because Galactic Mining Consortium policy requires consultation with xenobiological specialists before implementing lethal force protocols, Vexcol recited with the mechanical precision of someone who had memorized the manual. You are the nearest certified wildlife relocation expert. Mira looked at her credentials floating in the hologram. Doctor of Veterinary Medicine, Earth. Xenobiology certification, Luna University. Wildlife Management Specialist. On paper, she was qualified. In reality, her biggest challenge to date had been relocating a family of space-adapted raccoons from a cargo bay. Right, she said. And these creatures are what exactly? Kethmaran apex predators, roughly 3 meters in length, possessing retractable plasma claws, reinforced bone structure, and what our analysts describe as unreasonable levels of aggression toward mining equipment. Plasma claws. Mira repeated the words slowly, as if saying them differently might make them less terrifying. You know what? I'm starting to think my insurance doesn't cover this. The transport shuttle bucked and shuddered as it descended through the atmosphere of Kepler 442c, which the mining consortium had optimistically designated as mostly habitable and probably safe for industrial operations. Mira gripped her seat as the pilot, a nervous Andromedan whose crystalline skin kept shifting colors, muttered something about atmospheric disturbances and unexpected wildlife activity. Define unexpected, Mira called over the engine noise. Well, the pilot said, his skin flashing an alarming shade of orange. The original survey indicated standard carbon-based flora and fauna, nothing larger than what you'd call a deer. And now? Now we're tracking movement signatures consistent with creatures the size of your Earth elephants, with significantly more teeth. The shuttle touched down at the mining colony with all the grace of a brick hitting concrete. Through the viewport, Mira could see the prefabricated structures that made up the mining operation, most of which looked like they'd been used as scratching posts by something very large and very irritated. Commander Vexcol met her at the Gita landing pad, flanked by 2 security officers whose body language suggested they'd rather be literally anywhere else in the galaxy. Dr. Blackwood, welcome to Mining Colony 23 Epsilon. As you can see, we have a situation. A situation, Mira said, looking at a cargo container that had been peeled open like a tin can. Is that what we're calling it? The creatures appeared approximately 6 standard days ago, Vexcol continued, leading her toward the main operations building. They established a den in the primary excavation site and have since demonstrated extreme territorial behavior toward any approach. Have you tried, asking them to leave? Vexcol's antennae twitched in what Mira was learning to recognize as the Zephyrian equivalent of a confused stare. Asking them? Communication, negotiation, the radical concept of treating intelligent life as intelligent. Dr. Blackwood, these are apex predators. They operate on instinct, not reason. Mira paused at the entrance to the operations building, where someone had posted a sign reading, "Danger, hostile wildlife," in 17 languages. Right. Because nothing says mindless instinct like strategic territorial control and coordinated defensive behavior. Inside the operations center, a crowd of miners and technicians huddled around monitoring equipment, their faces displaying the universal expression of people who had signed up for industrial work and gotten a nature documentary instead. The main screen showed a feed from the mining site, or what was left of it. Sweet mother of Darwin, Mira whispered, staring at the footage. The excavation site looked like it had been redesigned by something with very strong opinions about human architecture. Equipment had been systematically dismantled, with metal components arranged in what almost looked like defensive barriers around a central area that the cameras couldn't quite penetrate. "The den is located in the deepest part of the excavation," explained Chief Engineer Thoxall, a Rigelian whose fur was standing on end with nervous energy. "Our attempts to approach have been unsuccessful." "Define unsuccessful." Thoxall gestured to a medical bay where several miners were being treated for what appeared to be non-fatal but highly educational encounters with something that had claws. "No casualties, but significant discouragement of further exploration attempts." Mira studied the footage more carefully. "They're not killing anyone." "Pardon." "Look at the attack patterns. These creatures could obviously kill your people if they wanted to. Instead, they're delivering what amounts to warning shots. That's not mindless aggression. That's communication." Commander Vexkol's antennae were now vibrating with what Mira suspected was frustration. "Doctor, regardless of their communication methods, the creatures must be removed. The mining operation cannot proceed with apex predators occupying the primary excavation site." "And your proposed solution is?" "Plasma charges. We eliminate the threat and resume operations." Mira turned to stare at him. "You want to blow up a family of intelligent creatures because they're inconvenient. They are not a family. They are hostile wildlife. Have you actually looked at the behavioral data? The defensive positioning, the coordinated responses, the fact that they're not killing your people when they easily could?" Mira pulled up the attack reports on her tablet. "This isn't territorial aggression. This is parental protection." The room fell silent except for the hum of life support systems and the distant sound of something large moving around in the excavation site. "Parental protection," Commander Vexkol repeated slowly. "You didn't build a mining operation on an empty planet," Mira said, the pieces clicking together in her mind. "You built it on top of a nursery." That's when the lights went out, and something roared in the distance with the kind of sound that made every instinct in Mira's body scream, "Run." "Well," she said into the darkness, "this just got interesting." Emergency lighting bathed the operations center in hellish red as backup systems kicked in. Through the reinforced windows, Mira could see massive shapes moving between the buildings with the fluid grace of apex predators who had decided that subtlety was overrated. "Status report," Commander Vexkol barked, his voice cracking slightly. "Power grid is intact," reported a technician, whose hands were shaking as he worked his console. "The creatures appear to have surgically disabled our primary lighting array." "Surgically?" Mira asked. "They cut the cables with precision. No collateral damage to surrounding systems." Mira looked out at the shapes moving through the colony. Even in the dim emergency lighting, she could make out details that made her veterinary training kick into high gear. These weren't mindless monsters. They were exhausted parents dealing with a crisis. "I'm going out there," she announced. The room erupted in protests from every species present, creating a cacophony that sounded like a diplomatic incident set to music. "Absolutely not," Commander Vexkol said. "You will remain in the secure facility until we can implement proper containment protocols." "Containment protocols?" Mira was already moving toward the equipment lockers. "You mean the plasma charges that will turn this place into a crater?" "If necessary, yes." Mira stopped and turned to face the room full of terrified miners and bureaucrats. "Let me explain something to all of you. I've spent the last 10 years dealing with scared, aggressive animals. You know what the #1 cause of animal aggression is? Fear. You know what makes animals more afraid? Loud noises, bright lights, and groups of strangers with weapons." She gestured toward the window, where one of the creatures was visible in profile. A magnificent predator the size of a small shuttle, with bioluminescent markings that pulsed in what looked suspiciously like a pattern. "Those aren't monsters. Those are parents who think you're threatening their children. And your solution is to prove them right, by actually threatening their children." Chief Engineer Thoxall's fur was practically standing straight up. "Doctor, even if your assessment is correct, approaching apex predators with offspring is exponentially more dangerous than sitting here arguing while they get more stressed and more defensive," Mira interrupted. "Look, I can either go out there and try to de-escalate this situation, or you can wait for them to decide that the best defense is a good offense." Your choice. She grabbed a portable medical kit and a handful of emergency rations from the supplies. But I'm going either way, because that's what I do. I help scared animals, regardless of how many teeth they have. The walk from the operations center to the excavation site felt like the longest 100 meters of Mira's life. Every shadow could hide a 3-meter apex predator. Every sound could be her last warning before becoming a cautionary tale about the dangers of xenobiology fieldwork. But as she approached the excavation site, something interesting happened. The creatures didn't attack. Instead, they watched. Mira could feel eyes on her from multiple directions. Intelligent eyes that were evaluating her threat level and finding her not particularly threatening. Which, given that she was a 5'6" human approaching a family of apex predators with nothing but a medical kit and some protein bars, was probably accurate. The den itself was a masterpiece of defensive architecture. The creatures had used mining equipment to create a series of barriers and shelters around what appeared to be a natural cave system. It was organized, purposeful, and clearly designed by intelligence rather than instinct. "Hello," Mira called softly, settling down about 20 meters from the nearest barrier. "I'm Dr. Blackwood. I'm here to help." The response was immediate. A low, rumbling sound that seemed to come from multiple directions at once. Not aggressive, Mira realized, but communicative. They were talking to each other about her. One of the adults emerged from behind a barrier, moving with careful deliberation. Up close, the creature was even more impressive. Sleek fur marked with bioluminescent patterns, intelligent golden eyes, and yes, those plasma claws that could probably cut through just about anything. But what caught Mira's attention wasn't the predator's weapons. It was the way it moved, the careful, exhausted gait of a parent who hadn't slept in days. "You're tired," she said gently. "How long have you been defending this place?" The creature tilted its massive head, studying her with obvious curiosity. Then it made a sound. Not a roar or a growl, but something that sounded almost like a question. "I know," Mira said, pulling out one of the protein bars and placing it on the ground between them. "Strangers showed up, started making noise, probably scared your kids. You did what any good parent would do." The creature sniffed in her direction, then made another sound, this one clearly directed back toward the den. A moment later, Mira heard something that made her heart skip a beat. Chittering. High-pitched, querulous chittering that sounded exactly like... "Oh my God," she whispered. "You have babies." As if summoned by her words, a small head peeked out from behind one of the barriers, then another. Within moments, Mira was looking at what appeared to be a litter of apex predator cubs, each about the size of a large dog and covered in the same bioluminescent markings as their parents. They were also, quite obviously, cranky. The cubs were making the universal sounds of young creatures who were tired, hungry, and thoroughly fed up with the current situation. Their parents, meanwhile, had the frazzled look of beings who had been dealing with cranky toddlers while simultaneously fending off what they perceived as threats to their family. "Oh, you poor things," Mira said, and she wasn't talking to the cubs. She opened her medical kit and pulled out a handheld scanner, nothing threatening, just a basic diagnostic tool. The adult predator watched with interest as she ran it over herself, demonstrating that it was harmless. "See? Just checking to make sure everyone's healthy." She held out the scanner. "May I?" The predator considered this for a long moment, then slowly extended one massive paw. The scanner beeped quietly, displaying readings that made Mira nod with professional satisfaction. "Elevated stress hormones, mild dehydration, sleep deprivation," she read. "Classic symptoms of new parent syndrome. When was the last time you got a decent night's sleep?" The predator made a sound that clearly meant, "What is this sleep you speak of?" "Right, kids'll do that to you." Mira looked at the cubs, who were now venturing closer with the fearless curiosity of youngsters who hadn't yet learned that the universe could be dangerous. "How old are they?" One of the cubs, braver than its siblings, approached Mira with the deliberate waddle of a creature whose legs were still figuring out how to work properly. It sniffed at her boots, then looked up at her with enormous golden eyes that held the kind of innocent trust that could melt the heart of anyone who wasn't completely dead inside. "Hello, sweetheart," Mira said softly. "Aren't you adorable?" The cub chittered happily and promptly tried to climb into her lap, apparently deciding that this strange new creature was acceptable furniture. Its siblings, not to be outdone, began approaching as well. Within minutes, Mira found herself in the middle of what could only be described as an apex predator puppy pile, while their parents watched with expressions that she was pretty sure translated to, "Thank you, God, someone else can entertain them for 5 minutes." "You know what I think happened here?" she said to the adult predators, gently extracting herself from a cub who had decided her hair needed thorough investigation. "I think you built your nursery in what seemed like a nice, quiet cave system. Then a bunch of strangers showed up with loud machines and started digging. Your kids got scared, you got protective, and everyone's been escalating ever since." The adult predators exchanged glances, then looked back at her, with what she was increasingly convinced was relief. Someone finally understood. "The good news," Mira continued, "is that this is totally fixable. The bad news is that my colleagues back there are currently debating whether to nuke your family from orbit." Both adults immediately went into alert posture, and Mira quickly held up her hands. "Which is why I'm here. We're going to figure this out together, like reasonable people. Because that's what you are, isn't it? People." The larger of the two adults, probably the male based on size and marking patterns, made a sound that seemed to convey agreement, frustration, and a certain amount of, "Finally, someone gets it." "Right," Mira said, as cubs continued to use her as climbing equipment. "Let's go have a chat with the management. I think it's time they met their new neighbors properly." That's when her communicator crackled to life with Commander Vexcole's voice. "Dr. Blackwood, we're reading multiple large signatures converging on your position. Please advise your status immediately." Mira looked around at the family of apex predators who had apparently adopted her as their official human liaison, then at the cubs who were now napping in a pile around her feet. "Status is complicated," she replied, "but I think we're making progress." "Define progress," Commander Vexcole's voice crackled through the communicator, with the strained patience of someone whose day had gone completely off the rails. Mira looked down at the apex predator cub that had claimed her lap as its personal napping spot, then up at the two massive adults who were now flanking her like the world's most intimidating bodyguards. "Well, I haven't been eaten yet. That's progress, right? Dr. Blackwood, we're showing heat signatures of at least 6 large creatures in your immediate vicinity. Are you in immediate danger?" "That depends on your definition of danger," Mira said, gently stroking the sleeping cub's fur. "If you mean likely to be torn apart by apex predators, then no. If you mean likely to be crushed by overly affectionate alien toddlers, then maybe." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that usually preceded either breakthrough diplomatic agreements or complete mental breakdowns. "Doctor," Vexcole said finally, "please clarify your current situation." "I'm having a playdate," Mira replied. "And before you ask, yes, I'm aware of how that sounds." What she didn't mention was that the situation had become significantly more complicated in the last few minutes. The original family of predators had apparently sent out some kind of signal, because more adults were arriving. Not aggressively, more like relatives showing up to check on the new babysitter. "Mira." The voice was different now. Chief Engineer Thoxall, his Rigelian accent thick with worry. "We're tracking at least 12 large signatures converging on the excavation site. Whatever you're doing, it's attracting more of them." "That's because word is spreading," Mira said, watching as another family group approached the den site. These newcomers had cubs of their own, slightly older ones who immediately began investigating the strange human with the fearless enthusiasm of children everywhere. They're curious about the weird alien who isn't trying to kill them. The male from the original family, Mira had started thinking of him as Rex because naming things made them less terrifying, made a series of complex vocalizations to the newcomers. The conversation that followed was clearly sophisticated communication, complete with what appeared to be introductions and explanations. "They're talking about me," Mira realized. "Rex is telling them I'm safe." "Rex?" Vexcol's voice had reached new levels of strain. The alpha male. I had to call him something. Mira paused as one of the newer cubs, emboldened by the peaceful scene, approached her with a small object in its mouth. "Oh, what have you got there, sweetie?" The cub dropped the object at her feet and chittered proudly. It was a piece of mining equipment, specifically, a sensor array that had been very carefully dismantled without damaging any of the delicate components. "Interesting," Mira murmured, examining the device. "They're not destroying your equipment randomly. They're studying it." "What do you mean?" Thoxal's voice was sharp with professional interest. "This sensor array has been taken apart with surgical precision. Every component is intact, just reorganized. They're trying to figure out how it works." The implications of that statement settled over the comm channel like a lead blanket. "Dr. Blackwood," Vexcol said carefully, "are you suggesting that these creatures possess technological curiosity?" "I'm suggesting that these creatures are a lot smarter than anyone gave them credit for." Mira looked around at the growing gathering of predator families, all of whom were watching her with obvious intelligence. "And I think they've been trying to figure out what you people want." That's when the situation took a turn for the dramatically worse. The sound of approaching aircraft filled the air. Heavy transports, by the sound of them. Military transports. Rex and the other adults immediately went into defensive posture, positioning themselves between the cubs and the approaching threat. "Vexcol," Mira said into her communicator, her voice sharp with warning. "Please tell me you didn't call in the cavalry." "I may have requested additional security consultation," Vexcol admitted. "You called the military, while I'm sitting in the middle of a family gathering of apex predators with their children. The situation required thinking, not shooting." Mira was on her feet now, cubs scrambling around her legs in confusion as their parents began making the low, rumbling sounds that meant serious trouble was coming. The first transport landed with a thunderous roar of engines, disgorging a squad of heavily armed Centaurian security forces. Their leader, a tall female with the kind of military bearing that suggested she ate problems for breakfast, strode toward the excavation site with her weapon ready. "This is Captain Zexandra of Galactic Mining Consortium Security," she announced through a loudspeaker. "All personnel are to evacuate the area immediately. We are implementing Protocol 15 Delta for hostile wildlife elimination." Protocol 15 Delta? Mira looked at Rex, whose bioluminescent markings were now pulsing in what she was pretty sure was the apex predator equivalent of "over my dead body." "What's Protocol 15 Delta?" "Orbital bombardment." Thoxal's voice was barely a whisper. "They're going to bomb a nursery," Mira said, the words coming out flat and cold. "They're going to bomb children." Rex made a sound that needed no translation. It was the sound of a parent who had just been told that someone was threatening his family. The other adults responded in kind, and suddenly Mira found herself in the middle of what was rapidly becoming a very tense standoff. "Captain Zexandra," she called out, stepping forward with her hands raised. "I'm Dr. Blackwood, xenobiological consultant. I need you to stand down immediately." "Doctor, you are in extreme danger," Zexandra replied. "Move away from the hostile creatures so we can neutralize the threat." "The only threat here is you," Mira shot back. "These are intelligent beings protecting their families. If you attack them, you'll be committing genocide." "They are classified as non-sapient fauna," Zexandra said with the kind of bureaucratic certainty that had probably started more wars than it had ended. "Galactic law permits their elimination for mining safety purposes." "Galactic law is about to get a major revision," Mira said, then turned to Rex. "I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Rex looked at her, then at his cubs, then at the armed soldiers who were taking positions around the excavation site. His response was to step closer to Mira, placing his massive form between her and the security forces. "What are you doing?" Captain Zexandra demanded. "Something that's either going to save everyone's lives or get us all killed," Mira replied. Then, louder, "I'm calling for an emergency session of the Galactic Council. As a certified xenobiologist, I'm formally declaring these beings as sapient, species under the Protection of Intelligent Life Act." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of cubs chittering nervously and the distant hum of military equipment. "You can't do that," Zexandra said. "Actually, I can. And I just did. Mira looked around at the gathered predator families, then back at the security forces. Which means that if you attack them now, you won't just be eliminating hostile wildlife. You'll be committing an act of war against a newly recognized sapient species. This is insane, Zexandra muttered. This is Tuesday, Mira corrected, and it's about to get a lot more interesting. That's when the cubs decided to demonstrate their own opinion of the situation by toddling toward the security forces with the fearless curiosity of children who hadn't yet learned that some strangers weren't friendly. Rex made a sound that clearly meant, "Oh hell no," and moved to intercept his offspring before they could get themselves into trouble. Captain Zexandra, faced with the sight of an apex predator approaching her position, did what military training had taught her to do. She raised her weapon. And that's when Mira learned exactly how fast a concerned parent could move when their children were in danger. The next few seconds unfolded with the kind of chaotic precision that usually required either extensive choreography or complete disaster. Rex moved like liquid lightning, covering the distance between himself and his wandering cubs in a heartbeat. Captain Zexandra's finger tightened on her weapon trigger, and Mira did the only thing that seemed reasonable in a situation that had abandoned all pretense of reason. She threw herself between a 3-meter apex predator and a squad of heavily armed soldiers, arms spread wide like the world's least qualified traffic cop. "Nobody shoot anybody!" she yelled. The tableau that resulted was the kind of thing that would have been hilarious if it weren't potentially fatal. Rex skidded to a halt inches from Mira, his claws extended but carefully positioned to avoid harming her. Captain Zexandra's weapon was trained on the massive predator, while her squad maintained firing positions on the other adults. The cubs, oblivious to the tension, continued their exploration of the interesting new visitors. "Dr. Blackwood," Zexandra said through gritted teeth, "move away from the creature." "His name is Rex," Mira replied calmly, "and he's not going to hurt anyone unless you give him a reason to. It's an apex predator. He's a father protecting his children. There's a difference." Rex, apparently deciding that the situation required his input, made a series of complex vocalizations that sounded remarkably like diplomatic language. The other adults responded in kind, creating what was unmistakably a conversation. "They're talking," observed one of the security officers, lowering his weapon slightly. "Of course they're talking," Mira said. "They've been trying to communicate this whole time. You just weren't listening." Captain Zexandra's military training was clearly at war with the evidence of her own senses. Even if they are communicating, they remain a threat to mining operations. "Actually," said a new voice, "they might be the solution to your mining operations." Everyone turned to see Chief Engineer Thoxall approaching the group, his fur still standing on end, but his expression showing the kind of professional excitement that usually preceded either brilliant breakthroughs or spectacular explosions. "Explain," Zexandra demanded. Thoxall held up a tablet displaying sensor readings. "I've been analyzing the modifications these beings have made to our equipment. They haven't been destroying it. They've been improving it." "Improving it how?" "The sensor array that was damaged yesterday, it's now operating at 300% efficiency. They've somehow optimized the quantum resonance patterns in ways our best engineers didn't think possible." Mira looked at Rex, who was making what she was beginning to recognize as his smug expression. "You've been trying to help, haven't you?" Rex's response sounded remarkably like, "Obviously, but you people are very slow learners." "This is impossible," Captain Zexandra said. "Non-sapient creatures cannot perform complex technological modifications." "Which brings us back to the sapience issue," Mira pointed out. "Maybe it's time to admit that your classification system needs some work." That's when Commander Vexcol finally arrived at the excavation site, flanked by what appeared to be half the mining colony's administrative staff. His antennae were vibrating at frequencies that suggested either extreme stress or an impending nervous breakdown. "Status report," he demanded. "Well," Mira said, as one of the cubs decided her leg made an excellent climbing post, "the good news is, nobody's been eaten. The bad news is, we're in the middle of a first contact situation with a species that's apparently smarter than most of your engineers." "First contact?" Vexcol's antennae stopped vibrating and went completely still. You're claiming these are sapient beings? I'm claiming these are people, Mira corrected. People who built their nursery in what they thought was a safe place, only to have strangers show up and start making noise. People who've been trying to communicate and help, while being treated like dangerous animals. Rex made another series of vocalizations, this time directed at Commander Vexcol. The meaning was clear, even without translation. Finally, someone with authority. Can we please sort this mess out? It's talking to me, Vexcol whispered. He's talking to you, Mira corrected. And based on body language, I think he's asking for a formal meeting. The next hour passed in a blur of impromptu diplomacy that would have made galactic historians weep with joy if they hadn't been too busy trying to document the proceedings. Rex, it turned out, was not just the alpha male of his family group. He was something like a regional coordinator for multiple predator communities. The attacks on mining equipment hadn't been territorial aggression. They had been attempts at technological collaboration by a species that had been watching the mining operation with scientific curiosity. They want to help, Mira translated as Rex gestured toward the excavation site. They understand you're trying to extract resources, and they know more efficient ways to do it without damaging the ecosystem. Efficient how? Commander Vexcol asked. Rex led them to a section of the excavation where the predators had been working. Instead of the crude blast and dig approach the miners had been using, they had created a series of precisely targeted tunnels that followed natural geological formations. The result was access to the same mineral deposits with a fraction of the environmental impact. Remarkable, breathed Chief Engineer Thoxall. They've mapped the entire underground structure. This would have taken us months to achieve. They've been living here for generations, Mira pointed out. They know every cave, every mineral vein, every underground water source. You want to mine this planet efficiently? Partner with the locals. Captain Zexandra, who had been growing increasingly uncomfortable as the situation evolved from pest control to diplomatic breakthrough, finally spoke up. This is all very interesting, but it doesn't change the fact that these beings have been attacking our personnel. Rex made a sound that was clearly exasperated, then walked over to one of the cubs and gently picked it up. The little predator chittered happily and waved at the assembled humans and aliens with the kind of innocent friendliness that made everyone's hearts melt. They weren't attacking your people, Mira said quietly. They were trying to keep you away from their children. Every attack was a warning, carefully calculated to discourage without causing serious harm. But the equipment damage was them trying to figure out what you were doing and how they could help. They're engineers, Captain. Natural engineers who've been trying to collaborate with a species too stupid to recognize intelligence when it's staring them in the face. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of more aircraft approaching. But these weren't military transports. They were diplomatic vessels bearing the insignia of the Galactic Council. Well, Commander Vexcol said, his antennae drooping with exhaustion, this day just keeps getting more interesting. 3 months later, Mira sat in her new office overlooking Mining Colony 23 Epsilon, which had been renamed New Harmony Research Station, in honor of its status as the galaxy's first successful human-alien apex predator cooperative venture. Through her window, she could see Rex's family playing with their cubs in the designated recreation area, while Kethmaran engineers worked alongside human and alien technicians to optimize mining operations. Productivity was up 400%, environmental impact was down 80%, and the Galactic Council had officially recognized the Kethmaran as a sapient species with full rights and protections. "Dr. Blackwood," came a voice from her doorway. She turned to see Captain Zexandra, who had been reassigned from security enforcement to interspecies liaison, after demonstrating an unexpected talent for diplomatic protocol. "What's the situation, Captain?" "We've received a request from Mining Colony 47 Gamma. They're experiencing similar wildlife difficulties and requesting human consultation." Mira looked out at Rex, who was currently teaching a group of human children how to properly dig tunnels while their parents watched in fascination. "Let me guess. Apex predators interfering with operations?" "Crystalline entities with apparent technological capabilities," Zexandra confirmed. "The miners are calling them Aggressive mineral formations. Mira laughed and stood up, grabbing her field kit. Aggressive mineral formations. Right. I suppose they haven't tried talking to them. Talking to rocks was not considered a viable option. It never is, Mira said, heading for the door. Come on, Captain. Let's go introduce another mining operation to the concept of asking nicely. As they left the office, Rex looked up from his impromptu geology lesson and made a sound that clearly meant, humans are strange but useful creatures who make life more interesting. Mira waved at him and headed for the transport, already composing her preliminary report in her head. Subject: Crystalline Entity Contact Protocol. Recommendation: try treating them like people instead of rocks. Revolutionary concept, I know. The galaxy, she reflected, was full of aggressive wildlife that just needed someone to listen to them. And apparently, humans were getting very good at that particular job. Even if it did make for some interesting insurance claims.